So he asked me to briefly present our project and to introduce Philippe and Roxane. So very briefly, I'm in charge of a project that we call Fox Creek because as the name says, it is located in the Fox Creek area, of course, in West Central Alberta. Some people from AGS and AER are involved in this project. Fox Creek was selected because it has been one of the most active regions for oil and gas production in Canada for the last 50 years. It is less active now, of course, but still. And it has experienced some of the largest induced seismic events in the country related to hydraulic fracturing. As you know, a lot of environmental concerns are related to oil and gas development, including surface water and groundwater contamination, water availability, seismic events, and forest fragmentation, just to name a few. The initial objective of this project was to study potential impacts of oil and gas activities on shallow aquifers. However, last fall, different sectors within my department and our CAN, so Natural Resources Canada, identified the Fox Creek area as a region of interest for developing regional cumulative effects evaluation methods in support of the new impact assessment legislation, so Bill C-69. Therefore, the project scope is now much larger and includes or will include studies on vegetation, forest, wetlands, landscape evolution, and thus indirectly woodland caribou habitat. This project focuses on a 700 square kilometer watershed located just southwest of the town of Fox Creek. However, larger or slightly different areas could be used for the other project components. This industrial region is, as you know, mainly forested and unpopulated, so there are no residential or farm wells that we can sample. Thus, we drilled 9 shallow wells very recently, and we will be monitoring them throughout the duration of the project, so until March 31st, 2024. Just as a background, as we started thinking about how to tackle cumulative effects in this project, we realized that we had more questions than answers, so we thought it would be a good idea first to have a master's student to do a literature review on what has been done worldwide on this topic, mainly related to environmental impacts, given the mandate of my department. So I contacted Roxane Lavoie. She's a professor at Université Laval, with whom I had worked with before on different aspects, notably on the use of groundwater and hydrogeological tools and maps that we developed within the framework of our project by land use planners. And she's also an expert in focus groups. And we found Philippe that we selected among many other candidates. And my contact at AGS that you may know, Brian Smurden, introduced me to Scott last summer, I think, and he has since been involved in Philippe's project. He has a lot of experience in cumulative effects, so that's great because we didn't have any or very little. Philippe has a very interesting background. He has a BSc in anthropology, during which he studied in Norway. He gained experience in socio-environmental studies by working for the organization grouping water management agencies in Quebec. Sorry, that's a very bad translation, but and also as a research assistant at the University of Rimouski, also in Quebec. He officially began his master's degree last January, 2020. But we had been able to hire him last October or November so that he could begin his literature review. Philippe has also conducted interviews with consultants from across Canada that have a lot of experience in both provincial and federal environmental assessments, in which cumulative effects must be assessed, as you know. And he has also organized interviews with Indigenous communities from Quebec that will take place very soon. We had organized in-person meetings with 2 Indigenous communities in Alberta near Fox Creek last March, but they had to be canceled at the last minute due to the pandemic. We haven't been able to convince them yet to do something different using a video conference. Hopefully it will happen, as I don't see the date when we'll be able to fly again. So Philip will talk about all that. So without further ado, please, Philip, go ahead with your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your introduction, and thank you everyone for being here today. It's very appreciated. I'm very glad that I can share my project with all of you. And yeah, so Christine already said I have a bachelor degree in anthropology, and I'm doing my master degree in land use planning at the Université Laval in Quebec City. And my project is to develop a strategy to improve the assessment of cumulative effects in Canada, but not only in the Fox Creek area, but mostly everywhere in Canada and in every context. So, sorry. So to begin here, the presentation outline, at first I will talk about the context of the research project. Christine already talked about that a bit, so maybe it will go faster. And after that, the history of the research problem, the project rationale, and the main objective of my project. Some key concepts of my theoretical framework of my project, and then some important elements I found in the literature review. I will present some, but not all of them because there's a lot in my literature review, but some important points. And then my research questions and my main objectives, and then the methodology to achieve my objectives. And then the timeline, what I did already, what I'm doing now, and what I will do in the future. And finally, some time for questions and comments. So the context of the research project, Christine already talked about that. My project is within the framework of the project of the Geological Survey of Canada, which is in the Fox Creek area in Alberta. And I'm doing my master degree at Laval University with the Geological Survey of Canada. So with my supervisor, Roxanne, which is a professor and a researcher at the university. And my degree is more focused on the cumulative effects component of the research project. So to develop a strategy to improve the practice. And I began in last October, so a year ago, doing a literature review on the state of cumulative effects assessment practice in Canada, and also on the challenges and opportunities for to improve the practice. So the history of the research problem. The first time someone talked about the cumulative effects, it was in 1978 in the United States, when the Council on Environmental Quality published the National Environmental Policy Act that required that every environmental assessment should include the cumulative effects assessment everywhere in the US. And then in the 1980s in Canada, the Canadian Environmental Assessment Research Council, they funded several studies on the subject of cumulative effects because the government didn't know a lot about the subject. So finally in 1992, the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act required that the assessment of cumulative effects in every EA is carried out in Canada. And then from 1996 to 2001, there was an annual one-week course for practitioners on the practice of cumulative effects assessment at the Banff Center for Management, because there was something difficult for consultants and mostly practitioners. So, and then to help them, again, in 1999, there was the publication of the methodological guide entitled the Cumulative Effects Assessment Practitioner's Guide. It was written by a group of consultants for the Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency. And then 10 years later, the government of Canada noticed that there was still problems and difficulties in the process of cumulative effects assessment. And the Canadian Council of Ministers of the Environment noted that the need to better assess and manage the cumulative environmental effects of human development activities is well established. However, there are constant and consistent messages that cumulative effects assessment and management in its current form in Canada is simply not working. And I will talk about that later of why it's not working, the reasons, the problems that are actually in the practice. After in 2014, there was the publication of a second guide assessing cumulative environmental effects under the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act 2012. And then in the late 2010s, 3 scientific articles highlighted some problems, obstacles that are still present in the practice of cumulative effects assessment in Canada. And then finally in 2019 with the Bill C-69, the Impact Assessment Act, it replaced the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act of 2012. And it put emphasis on cumulative effects assessment and also more on regional assessments and also on working collaboratively with Indigenous communities. So that is why Natural Resources Canada is funding research on this subject, including my master's degree, to improve the practice of cumulative effect assessment. So my project rationale is that since 1992, cumulative effects must be assessed in every EAs in Canada, but still the federal government identified gaps in the practice and obstacles. So as a result, the government is looking for solutions to improve the practice. So my main research goal is to develop a strategy to improve the assessment of cumulative effects in Canada. Now about the key concept of my research. These are 4 concepts that are in my theoretical framework. There's much more concept in my work at the moment, but I chose these 4 because they are, I think, the 4 more important in the research. So these are the effects, the cumulative effects, the valued components, so the VCs, and cumulative effects assessment. So at first, an effect is a change to the structure or function of the ecosystem. So a change to the habitat, biota, or their interactions. Also, an effect is noted when the structure or function of an environmental component changes beyond the normal range of variability associated with a given spatiotemporal baseline. Now about the cumulative effects. These are more legal definitions that we can find in government documents. So the first time that someone talked about the cumulative effects, it was in 1978 in the United States. And it was described as impact on the environment, which results from the incremental impact of the action when added to other past, present, and reasonably foreseeable future actions, regardless of what agency, federal or non-federal, or person undertakes such other actions. Cumulative impacts can result from individually minor but collectively significant actions taking place over a period of time. Then the definition in Canada in the practitioner guide, it's changes to the environment that are caused by an action in combination with other past, present, and future human actions. And then finally, the definition from the government of Quebec in 2018. This definition is very similar to the one I found on the website of the government of Alberta. It's changes in the environment caused by multiple interactions of human activities and natural processes that accumulate in time and space. Now, the definition of cumulative effects in the scientific literature, there's a lot of definitions in the scientific literature. But this one from an article from Franks et al. 2010 was, in my opinion, the most complete and also the most understandable. So the easiest to understand, but also the most complete. Cumulative effects are caused by one or more past, present, or future activities in a given territory. And it's also important to understand that it's not only industrial activities that can create cumulative effects. It can be also agricultural activities, recreational activities, or even traditional activities such as snowmobile, skiing, fishing, hunting. These are all kind of activities that can create cumulative effects on the territory. Also, these are effects on the physical environment, but also on the society and the economy, and they can be positive and negative effects. Here are two examples of cumulative effects. The first one on the left is, by example, we take the construction of pipelines, access roads, and seismic lines in a given territory. It causes forest fragmentation, and then it increases vulnerability of caribous. So wolves move more easily, caribous are more visible, etc. So we can see a decrease in the caribou population. There's another example on the right. If we take a river, by example, and there's an industry upstream, and it discharges its effluent in the river, and then more downstream, there's the city that discharges the sewage and the farm, the pesticides in the river. Individually, we can think that their impact are minor or not that much important, but cumulatively, it might be very, very important. It can go, the pollutant in the water can go over the thresholds established for the water quality. Now, for the value components, this concept is very important in the cumulative effects assessment process. It's a concept that was introduced by Binlanes and Drinker in 1983. And this concept represents the key elements which must be taken into account in the assessment of cumulative effects. And they also are being considered the most important for local actors. So it's to avoid considering every component in the area. So it's the selection of some valued components to avoid considering every component. A VC in Canada, it's an element of the environment, either natural or social, which is valued by inhabitants and specialists in the study area. And now, how should they be selected? The VCs, it's in consultation with the indigenous groups, communities, local populations, and specialists of the region. And why should it be that way? It's because sometimes components that are not considered important by proponents and or by government specialists might be important for other actors, so valued by other actors. By example, if by example there's species of bird that are not endangered, the proponent might think that they should not choose these species of bird for their valued components. But in the end, these specific species are hunted by First Nations. First Nation eat those species of bird. So now it's valued for the First Nation. So it's a valued component. So this is why it's important to select these VCs in consultation. And now cumulative effects assessment. Instead of focusing on the effects of a given action on the environment, the assessment of cumulative effects focuses on the condition of the environmental components and considers all possible stressors on a given receiver. So it's more an effect-based approach instead of a stressor-based approach. And the picture here on the left illustrates that. By example, a classic environmental impact assessment for the project A here will assess every impact of its project on every component, so on the air, climate, water, and on the community. And on the other end, the CEA, the Cumulative Effect Assessment, will assess how the climate is impacted by every action on the territory. So by the project A, the program B, the plan C, individual actions every other activity. So how all these actions have an impact on one component. So this is the difference between cumulative effects assessment and normal environmental impact assessment. So now there's two processes that I will show. They are pretty much similar. The first one is a process from two scientific articles that I found very interesting and easy to understand. So I will present the steps of cumulative effects assessment. So the first step is the selection of the VCs, which I already talked about. Then the definition of temporal and spatial boundaries for each VC, the identification of past, present, and reasonably foreseeable future activities in the study area, the definition of the baseline condition for each VC, and then to link the effects of the project and also of the other activities on the territory to each VC, and then to assess the significance and likelihood of each effect. And for each effect expected on each VC, develop mitigation measures. And finally, to develop a monitoring program, assess the significance of the effects, and then to share the data collected. The process from the Canadian government is pretty much similar. So it's the scoping, analysis, mitigation, significance, and follow-up. So it's pretty much the same, but in different words. So now some points that I took from my literature review about the hindrances in the practice of CEA. The first one is that the quality and consistency of data on the environment varies depending on the jurisdiction in Canada. It varies a lot. Also, proponents have difficulty to plan and mitigate cumulative effects associated with the project in the absence of regional environmental assessments. So with the lack of data, it's difficult for them to assess the cumulative effects. Also, another big obstacle is that is the consultants' misunderstanding of the concept of cumulative effects. It was noted by a lot of different authors in the scientific literature that some consultants that are asked to assess the cumulative effects just don't understand what are really cumulative effects. So that's an obstacle in the practice. Also, the lack or absence of information about future projects in the study area. It was also talked about a lot in the scientific literature about the future projects that are kept confidential or secret by proponents. So it will make it very easier for consultants to assess cumulative effects or the future cumulative effects of the project if they had information about other future projects. Also, the limited access to the monitoring data of other projects in the study area. These data exist, but they are just not publicly available. So that's another hindrance. Also, the lack of data on the VC conditions, it's similar to the first point I just talked about. Also, the lack of collaboration between stakeholders in the assessment and management of cumulative effects. So the lack of collaboration between the federal government, also with the provinces, with the provincial governments, with cities and small municipalities, with First Nations, with the environmental organization, sorry. So there's a lack of collaboration between all these stakeholders. Also, difficulty in selecting appropriate spatial temporal boundaries for each VC. That's also an obstacle in the practice. So now here are some solutions and recommendations proposed to improve the practice of cumulative effects assessment. The first solution was to publish the practitioner guide in 1999. It helped a lot the consultants to conduct this kind of assessment, and then the publication of the second guide in 2012. Also, the government of Canada, they recommend that conducting regional assessments will help the practice. So conduct regional assessments to guide the planning and management of cumulative effects. It's ongoing. There's some regional assessments going on in Canada at the moment, like the one in Ontario in the Ring of Fire, by example. Also, use a national platform that will integrate science and open data to inform environmental frameworks and regional assessments. It's under development, so it's an ongoing process as well. It's the Open Science and Data Platform, which is led by Natural Resources Canada and Environment and Climate Change Canada. So it's now ongoing, and they're supposed to integrate every data available in their platform. And also, another recommendation is that governments should make data archives available to all stakeholders. So it was proposed. Now it's ongoing in Canada. Practitioners should define about the spatial temporal limits. Practitioners should define the spatial limits according to the ecological limits instead of the project limits. By example, atmospheric basin, watershed, habitat, etc. And now about the time limit, practitioners should select the past time limit according to pre-disturbance state if possible, but it's not very often possible because of the lack of data. So otherwise use current condition of the VC. And about the future limit, practitioners should select the future limit according to the expected time when the VC will no longer be affected by the project, instead of focusing on the project operation limit, because sometimes even after the project has ceased operations, there's effect on the VC. Now about my research question and objectives. My research question is, what are the hindrances and difficulties encountered by consultants in the practice of cumulative effects assessment in Canada, and how can they be overcome in order to improve the practice? My main research objectives are to provide an overview of the state of scientific knowledge on cumulative effects assessment, to identify the main environmental concerns for Indigenous communities in Alberta and in Quebec, as well as collect the information on their opinions on cumulative effects, and also their potential concerns and recommendations related to the practice of cumulative effects assessment. Also to identify the hindrances in the cumulative effects assessment process in Canada. And finally, to develop proposals and realistic solutions that address the difficulties encountered in the current practice in Canada, and that will help industrial project proponents and also their consultants to assess and manage cumulative effects more easily and effectively. Now, these are every methodology used to achieve every objective. So for the first one to provide an overview of the scientific knowledge on cumulative effects assessments, it was a literature review. The second objective, which is identifying the concerns of Indigenous communities in Alberta and in Quebec about cumulative effects, and also to collect their concerns and recommendations related to the practice of cumulative effects assessment. The methodology, Christine hindrances, but I also I did 12 semi-structured interviews with consultants. No, actually it's 13, I made a mistake, but yeah, 13 interviews with consultants across Canada, and also with 2 federal government employees. And then I will do, it's not done yet, the thematic analysis of qualitative data, but I will do it soon with the NVivo software. And finally, the last objective, to propose a strategy to improve the practice of cumulative effect assessment, is based on the literature review. Also on the semi-structured interview I did with the consultants and with the federal government employees, and also with the thematic analysis of qualitative data I will do. And then to develop the strategy for implementing a process that will facilitate access to the required data, and also to the consideration of VCs deemed important by the local actors. So finally, my timeline, I started officially last winter, but I started a bit earlier in October to begin my literature review. So I began 1 year ago my literature review, which is still ongoing. And I completed also some tasks last winter, sorry. So the writing of the research proposal, also every interview guides for all the participants, also the recruitment letters and the consent forms for every participants. So the First Nation communities, the consultants and government employees. And also I obtained the ethics certificate from the ethics committee of Université Laval for the recruitment of participants. And then in winter and during summer, I recruited consultants and government employees for the interviews. I conducted every interviews during summer and autumn. I finished the weeks, like 2 or 3 weeks ago, all my interviews with the consultants and employees of the government. The focus groups with the First Nations is supposed to be in November. And then the verbatim transcription, so the transcription of every interviews will started during summer, and now I'm finishing it soon, I hope. And after that, every data analysis about the interviews and the focus groups will be during autumn and winter. And then finally, the writing of my thesis will begin during winter and finish during summer 2021. And also the writing of the conclusion and the proofread of all sections of my master thesis is supposed to be at the summer 2021 as well. So this is it. So if you have questions,